The sound was faint at first, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I stirred in bed, the haze of sleep retreating as my senses sharpened. The house was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that feels wrong. My eyes opened to darkness, the digital clock on the nightstand reading 2:42 a.m. I reached instinctively for the warmth of my husband beside me, but my hand met only cold, rumpled sheets. "Ryan," I called out softly. My voice sounded alien in the stillness, swallowed by the oppressive quiet of the room. There was no answer. I sat up, blinking into the dark, my mind grasping for logical explanations. Maybe he'd gone to the kitchen for water, or stepped into the bathroom. But as the minutes dragged on, unease began to settle in my chest. Sliding out of bed, I wrapped myself in my robe and stepped into the hallway. The wooden floor creaked under my feet, the sound magnified in the stillness. I called his name again, louder this time, but the house offered no response. The bathroom light was off, the door ajar. I peeked inside, empty. The kitchen, too, was dark, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sign of life. I checked the living room, the study, even the front porch, but Ryan was nowhere to be found. My pulse quickened as I returned to our bedroom. His phone was still on the nightstand, its screen dark and unmoving. His wallet sat next to it, undisturbed. The sight of those familiar objects, so mundane and yet so strangely out of place without him, sent a shiver down my spine. That's when I noticed the faint scent in the air, something cold and metallic, like iron. It wasn't there before. My gaze drifted to the window. The curtains were slightly ajar, the moonlight spilling onto the carpet in pale streaks. A figure flickered at the edge of my vision, just outside the glass. My breath hitched as I whipped around, my heart hammering, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there, just the shadow of the tree swaying against the house. Shaking, I backed away from the window and climbed into bed, pulling the covers around me like a shield. I told myself I was overreacting. Ryan would be back any minute, explaining how he couldn't sleep and had gone for a walk or driven to clear his head. But as the hours crawled by and dawn began to break, I couldn't shake the gnawing certainty that something was very, very wrong. Morning arrived, bringing with it an unnatural stillness. The light streaming through the bedroom window felt pallid, drained of warmth. I hadn't slept. My mind had replayed the events of the night over and over, every creak and whisper twisted into potential answers that led nowhere. I reached for my phone, dialing Ryan's number with trembling fingers. The call went straight to voicemail. I stared at the screen, the absence of his name or a cheery profile photo feeling like an accusation. Desperate for normalcy, I searched for his things. His clothes hung neatly in the closet, too neatly. Ryan had always been a bit careless, leaving ties askew or shirts bunched at the edges of hangers. Now, the arrangement was suspiciously pristine, as if untouched by human hands. I rifled through his drawers. His favorite sweater was there, but it no longer smelled of him. No faint trace of his cologne or the cedarwood detergent he loved. My pulse quickened as I realized the toothbrush he'd used every morning was absent from the holder in the bathroom. I clung to logic, convincing myself he must have taken it for some inexplicable reason. But my unease grew sharper when I found his shoes lined neatly by the door, every pair accounted for. Determined to find answers, I ventured outside. Our street was quiet, the morning paper lying untouched on the driveway. I retrieved it, flipping through pages mindlessly, until I reached the obituary section. There, nestled among unfamiliar names, was a single empty rectangle, a space where a photo or name should have been. The sight struck me like a blow, though I couldn't explain why. I folded the paper and returned inside, my thoughts racing. The neighbors. Someone must have seen him or heard something. I crossed the street to talk to Mrs. Peterson, who always seemed to know everyone's business. She answered the door with her usual smile, but when I mentioned Ryan, her expression clouded with confusion. "I'm sorry, dear. Ryan, your husband, I don't think I've met him." The words struck like ice in my veins. "You've met him dozens of times," I insisted, my voice cracking. "He helped you move that heavy table last month." She frowned. "You must be mistaken, dear. I've lived here 10 years, and I've only ever seen you." I left in a daze, knocking on other doors, but the responses were the same. No one remembered Ryan, not his face, his name, or his presence. It was as if he had never existed at all. When I returned home, I was shaking. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the photos on it, desperate for proof of him, of us. But picture after picture showed only me, smiling alone at the beach, standing solo at our anniversary dinner, lounging in our backyard with a book. The final blow came when I stumbled upon our wedding photo. The picture was perfect, exactly as I remembered, except that the groom's face was a blank void, a smear of light where Ryan should have been. The phone slipped from my fingers. I was left staring at the empty bed, my breath catching in sobs. Ryan was gone, and I was beginning to wonder if he had ever been real. The rest of the day passed in a haze, my mind swinging wildly between panic and denial. The idea that Ryan might not have existed was absurd, impossible. We had shared too much, lived too much. I could still hear his laugh, feel the warmth of his hand in mine. But the growing absence around me, the gaps in photos, the neighbors' blank stares, told a different story. I needed proof, something tangible. I tore through the house like a storm. I pulled open drawers, flipped through books, and dug into storage boxes. My search yielded fragments that should have grounded me. A cufflink engraved with his initials, a ticket stub from a movie we had watched together, even a note he had scribbled to remind me to buy milk. But there was something off about these things. The cufflink's engraving felt shallow, as if it had been hastily scratched onto the metal. The ink on the ticket stub was faded beyond what a few years could explain. The note, which I had once thought charmingly messy, now seemed sterile, its letters perfectly spaced, as though written by someone imitating Ryan's handwriting rather than by him. In the study, I opened his desk drawers, half expecting them to be empty. Instead, I found a pile of papers, bills, receipts, and insurance documents. Relief surged through me. These were official records, evidence of his existence. But as I scanned them, my hope faltered. The documents had his name, Ryan Daniels, printed clearly, but there were no dates. The fields for time frames, due dates, signatures, even account numbers were blank, smudged, or blurred. They were placeholders, as if someone had designed them to look real at a glance, but never intended closer scrutiny. I sank to the floor, clutching a faded utility bill as the realization hit me. These were props, carefully placed artifacts meant to construct a life that was unraveling by the second. Desperation drove me to my laptop. I logged into our shared bank account, certain that the digital world couldn't lie. But when I entered the login credentials, an error message greeted me. Account not found. My pulse thundered as I opened my email, searching for anything. Messages, shared files, even a silly meme he had sent. But my inbox was strangely empty, void of any correspondence from Ryan. It was as if he had been erased from the digital world as completely as he had been from my home. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through my contacts. His name was still there. I tapped it, trembling, and brought the phone to my ear. "This number is no longer in service," a robotic voice informed me. The finality of the message crushed me. I sat there, staring blankly at the walls, when the faint metallic scent returned, sharp and cloying. It felt like an intrusion, a tangible reminder of something I didn't understand but couldn't escape. I looked up and saw the photo on our dresser, the one of us at the cabin in the mountains. Only now, the cabin wasn't there. The backdrop was an empty forest, the snow untouched where the building should have stood. Ryan was gone, and the world itself seemed determined to erase every trace of him. The next few nights passed in restless silence. I barely slept, my mind churning through questions with no answers. The house felt different, heavier, as though its walls were leaning in closer, conspiring against me. On the third night, I awoke to the faint sound of water dripping. The clock read 3:07 a.m. The sound wasn't rhythmic, it was irregular, almost hesitant, like the tap of footsteps. I followed the noise to the bathroom. The faucet was off, but the mirror was fogged, as though someone had just stepped out of the shower. A chill crept up my spine as I reached out to touch it. My fingers came away damp, though the air was cold. And then I saw it. The fog shifted, revealing a phrase scrawled across the glass, each letter sharp and deliberate, written from the other side. "Look below." My heart pounded as I crouched to open the cabinet beneath the sink. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Just spare soap, a bottle of cleaner, and a few neatly folded towels. But as I reached deeper, my fingers brushed against the edge of something hard and metallic. It was a small box, no larger than a shoebox, wrapped in faded brown paper. I didn't recognize it, and the sight of it made my skin prickle with unease. Carrying it to the bedroom, I placed it on the bed and carefully removed the paper. Beneath was a plain black tin, its surface cool to the touch. My trembling fingers pried it open. Inside, I found an envelope and an old, tarnished key. The envelope was unsealed, and the paper within was brittle and yellowed with age. The message was brief, written in the same handwriting as the note Ryan had left me for groceries. "If you're reading this, you've seen the signs. The key opens the floor. Find the truth, no matter the cost." I stared at the words, my breath catching in my throat. The floor. I turned the key over in my hand, its weight solid and reassuring. I thought of the peculiarities of this house, how Ryan had joked about its creaky boards and odd drafts. I had always dismissed them as quirks of an old building, but now I wasn't so sure. Armed with a flashlight, I walked to the bedroom, the key clutched tightly in my hand. As I knelt on the floor, I ran my fingers along the wooden boards, searching for anything that felt out of place. It didn't take long to find a small indentation, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. The key fit perfectly into the slot. With a soft click, the board lifted. Beneath was a dark, narrow passage leading down into the depths of the house. My flashlight illuminated the first few steps of a wooden staircase, descending into what seemed like an impossible void. The metallic scent was stronger here, curling around me like a warning. I hesitated at the threshold, fear and curiosity warring within me. The truth lay below, and I had to know. The stairs groaned beneath my weight, each creak amplified in the suffocating silence. My flashlight's beam danced on the walls, revealing aged wood streaked with dark stains. The metallic scent grew stronger with every step, sharp and invasive, curling at the back of my throat like smoke. I descended slowly, my breath shallow and uneven. The air grew colder, thicker, as if I were moving into a space forgotten by time itself. At the bottom, the stairs gave way to a narrow corridor lined with stone. The walls glistened faintly, damp to the touch, and the faintest vibration hummed in the stillness, like the house itself was alive. At the end of the corridor was a door, plain, unremarkable, and yet profoundly wrong. The wood was dark and smooth, devoid of knots or imperfections, and the handle gleamed, untouched by age. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the cold metal sending a jolt through my skin. The door swung open without resistance. Beyond was a room unlike anything I had expected. It was vast, impossibly so, stretching far beyond the dimensions of our home. The floor was a mosaic of polished black tiles, each one reflecting faint, flickering light from no discernible source. The walls were shrouded in shadow, their edges lost to darkness. At the center of the room was a single object, a bed. It was identical to the one upstairs, down to the embroidered duvet and the slight tear in the headboard fabric from when we had moved it. The sight sent a shiver through me. This wasn't just any bed, it was our bed. But it was wrong. The duvet sagged as if something invisible pressed against it, forming the faint outline of a body. The pillows were indented, as though a head rested upon them. I felt the pull of the uncanny, the sense that I was gazing into a mirror, distorted just enough to twist the familiar into something sinister. I approached cautiously, each step echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. My flashlight flickered as I drew closer, its beam struggling against the oppressive dark. The metallic scent was almost unbearable now, sharp and acrid, filling my lungs with every shallow breath. The closer I got, the more I noticed the faint traces of movement beneath the duvet. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, as though someone were breathing. My pulse thundered in my ears, and my hand tightened around the flashlight, its trembling beam hovering over the bed. "Ryan," I whispered, the name escaping my lips without thought. The moment the word left me, the room shifted. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest, and the hum in the walls rose to a low, resonant vibration. The outline beneath the duvet moved more distinctly now, the impression of shoulders turning slightly toward me. I froze as the shape beneath the covers slowly sat upright. The figure was obscured by shadows, its features blurred and indistinct. It was unmistakably human in form, yet its edges shimmered faintly, like a mirage, as though the fabric of its existence was tenuous at best. "Ryan," I repeated, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't answer, but the air between us seemed to ripple, carrying a sense of recognition that made my skin crawl. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in a series of faint, echoing whispers that resonated directly in my mind. Fragments of Ryan's voice were woven into the sound, interspersed with tones that were alien and cold, like static from an otherworldly signal. "You shouldn't have come," the whispers said, overlapping and distorted. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the polished floor. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Where is my husband?" The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it raised a hand, familiar in its shape, yet unnaturally elongated, its edges blurring like smoke. It gestured to the room, to the walls, to the bed, as though encompassing everything around us. "He is here," the whispers replied. "He is everywhere, and nowhere." I felt tears sting my eyes as the fragmented words sank in. The figure wasn't Ryan. It was a distortion, a hollow echo of him, pieced together from fragments of his existence. "What does that mean?" I asked, barely audible. The whispers grew fainter, as though the figure were dissolving. "This place holds what was, but cannot be again. You have seen it. You must leave, before it keeps you too." The figure began to collapse inward, its form unraveling like threads pulled from fabric. I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed through empty air. The bed was now empty, the indentations gone. The room trembled as the whispers faded, and the oppressive weight around me grew unbearable. The light in my flashlight flickered wildly before dying altogether. In the pitch darkness, I felt the cold rise, pulling me back toward the door. I stumbled out of the room, the door slamming shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. The corridor felt longer on my way back, the hum growing fainter with each step. When I finally emerged into the bedroom, I was met with silence. The house was still, the metallic scent gone, but the emptiness felt more profound than ever. I collapsed onto the bed, our bed, and stared at the ceiling, the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me. Ryan was gone. Not taken, not stolen, but dissolved into the fabric of something far beyond my understanding. And as I lay there, the faintest whisper echoed in my mind. Don't stay too long.